They say marriage is about building a life together. For 20 years I believed in that. Gave her my time, my sweat, my loyalty. I thought we were partners. But when the mask finally slipped, I realized she hadn't been building with me. She'd been stripping me down piece by piece. My money, my health, my trust, even my own son's love. She stole 20 years of my life. But I wasn't about to let her walk away with the rest. And when I struck back, I didn't just take something from her. I took everything. I always thought time was something you spent willingly, like change in your pocket. You drop it into the meter, you buy a meal, you give it to the people you love. And if you're lucky, they spend theirs on you too, and the whole thing balances out. That's what I thought marriage was, mutual investment. My time for hers, my sweat for our family, her care for my heart. 20 years. I thought we were building something solid, something that would stand long after my hair turned gray. Looking back, I see the signs. They were always there, hidden between smiles, tucked under gestures that looked loving but were just distractions. The way she kept control of the finances, the way she'd insist on handling the bills, the paperwork, the accounts. At first I thought it was kindness. You work so hard, let me take this stress off your shoulders. I believed her. God help me, I believed her. When we bought the house, she chose it. When we opened joint accounts, she managed them. When we invested in retirement plans, she signed the papers. She made me feel like I was the strong arms and the tired back, and she was the brains that kept us afloat. I didn't argue. I trusted her. That was my mistake, the first and biggest. For years I worked 2 shifts. I gave up weekends, birthdays, vacations, all in the name of our future. I missed my son's first baseball game because I was pouring concrete under the July sun. I skipped my own 50th birthday because she said, "We can celebrate later, honey. The money will be better spent on the mortgage." Every sacrifice I justified with one phrase, "She's worth it." She and the family, but time has a way of showing you the bill. And mine came crashing down one night when I walked into the living room and overheard her whispering on the phone. Not sweet words, not friendly chatter, but numbers, accounts, names I didn't recognize. "He doesn't suspect a thing," she said, and I swear my blood ran colder than any winter I've ever lived through. I didn't storm in. I didn't yell. I sat down in the dark, heart pounding, listening to her sell me out piece by piece. She talked about the land I'd inherited from my father, the savings I thought were tucked away for retirement, even insurance policies I'd never signed but apparently existed in my name. She knew every inch of me, not because she loved me, but because she was cataloging me like inventory. 20 years, and I was nothing more than a ledger she'd been draining in silence. That night I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our life. Every time she told me, "Don't worry about it," every signature she rushed me through, every smile that seemed too perfect. It all connected in a sickening picture. She wasn't my wife, she was my warden. And my sentence had been 2 decades long. The hardest part wasn't the money. It wasn't even the lies. It was the realization that she'd taken something I couldn't get back. Time. 20 years I could have spent differently. 20 years I could have laughed harder, lived freer, loved someone who actually gave a damn. That was the theft that cut the deepest. But here's the thing about time. It may be gone, but it leaves something behind. Anger. And anger, when you learn how to sharpen it, becomes a weapon. As I lay there in the dark, I made myself a promise. She thought she had stolen my life. But she had forgotten one thing. I was still breathing. And as long as I could fight. I wasn't going to just leave. I wasn't going to crumble. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. No, I was going to take everything she thought was hers, piece by piece, just like she'd done to me. Only I was going to do it faster, cleaner, and in front of the whole damn world. And for the first time in 20 years, I smiled in the dark. Because she had no idea the storm that was coming. The next morning I acted normal. Coffee on the table, small talk about the weather, the usual dance of a married couple. She smiled like always, maybe even sweeter, thinking her secrets were safe. But behind my nods and polite grunts, I was studying her. Every blink, every word, every step. I went to work, but instead of pouring concrete and breaking my back like always, I made a different call. A friend of mine, Bill, retired from the force, now working private investigations. I told him what I'd overheard. At first, he hesitated. "Are you sure, John?" 20 years is a long time. Maybe you misheard. I didn't mishear. I gave him the details. He promised to dig. Days turned into weeks, and during that time I kept playing the part of the oblivious husband. I let her control the checkbook, let her make the calls, let her keep thinking I was the dumb ox hauling the wagon. Meanwhile, I started noticing little things I'd ignored before. Her late-night errands, the locked drawer in her study, the fact that mail I never saw somehow vanished into her purse. Then Bill called me back. His voice was heavy. "John, you're not gonna like this." He laid it out plain. My wife, my partner, my so-called better half, had siphoned nearly every dollar I'd earned into accounts under her control. Offshore accounts, fake shell companies. And the kicker? She wasn't just planning to drain me dry. She was preparing to leave me with the debt. Mortgages, loans, even forged credit cards in my name. When it all came crashing down, I'd be ruined, and she'd be sipping cocktails somewhere with my life's work in her pocket. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, and felt something inside me break. But right after it broke, something else lit up. Resolve. I told Bill I didn't want just evidence. I wanted everything. Every document, every photo, every trail she left behind. If she was going to gut me like a fish, then I was going to drag her into the light in front of everyone she thought she'd fooled. At home, I tested her. Subtle questions. "Honey, how's the retirement fund looking?" She'd flash that same smile, pat my hand, and lie straight to my face. "It's safe. Don't worry." The gall of it made me sick, but it also gave me fuel. Then one night, I came home earlier than expected. She didn't hear me walk in. I found her at the kitchen table, laptop open, whispering to someone through video call. And there it was, the final nail. She was planning the date. The day she'd disappear. The day I'd wake up to an empty house, an empty account, and 20 years erased like a chalkboard. She laughed, said, "He'll never see it coming." But I was already there, in the doorway, watching her. She turned pale when she saw me. For the first time in years, I didn't play dumb. I smiled, slowly, and I said the words that made her choke on her own fear. "You're right. I didn't see it coming. But you won't see what's next." Once I decided I wasn't going to be walked on anymore, my life narrowed to a single, terrible clarity. Collect everything, then make the world see it. That clarity is colder than anger and steadier than panic. It keeps you moving when the rest of you wants to fall apart. People imagine revenge as a single roaring moment, a shout, a wrecked car, a dramatic reveal under spotlight. That's for the movies. Real work is boring, meticulous, and lonely. It's spreadsheets at midnight and calls to banks you never thought you'd know the names of. It's learning how to read an account number the way you used to read blueprints. It's patience. I began where she thought I'd never begin, with the accounts. I opened a small folder in the kitchen drawer and started slipping copies of things in there. Receipts I'd found forgotten. A mysterious bank notice that had been shoved into the utility bill pile. A courier slip for a box I'd never seen. Each scrap looked meaningless on its own, But patterns were patient. Patterns make maps. I called Bill and asked him to move quietly. Not a brute force investigation. Discretion mattered. We didn't want a scene that would tip her off. He started with the stuff I couldn't. Surveillance at the bank branch where some suspicious transfers had originated. A quiet knock on the motel clerk's back door to ask if anyone had been in and out late at night. A copy of the ledger from a small vendor who'd been paid in cash deposits. He was good at asking the right questions, the ones everyone answers when they don't think it matters. While Bill worked the edges, I worked the inside. I rescanned my life with a different eye. Where before I'd seen helpful gestures, her insisting she'd handle the taxes, her quiet insistence on certain investments, I now saw leverage. I found the notarized document she'd taken out in my name to move a chunk of land title into a holding company I'd never heard of. I found invoices for consulting that paid into an account with her initials. I found receipts for flights I'd never taken, hotels I'd never checked into, all bought with cards tied back to us. The deeper I dug, the uglier the pattern got. She had built herself a safety net of funds and friends who received favors and expensive weekends. She'd purchased silence in small units, dinners, small loans, gifts to grateful mouths. People who take a favor rarely ask where it came from. That was her cloak. And once you pull that cloak away, cold wind hits hard. There were things that made my skin crawl, little betrayals that weren't about money, but about who she was. She'd been writing letters to a man upstate, a name I didn't recognize, using phrasing that made me sick. The words implied a life she'd been cultivating long before she'd started siphoning funds. The man wasn't discreet in the way my life had taught me. He was sloppy and cavalier. If I wanted to hurt, I knew where to start. Still, I needed witnesses. Facts with faces. So I reached out to folks who'd been awkwardly generous before. A landscape guy who'd been offered early payment for work he didn't yet do. A school volunteer who'd received a donation and felt funny about it. An old neighbor who'd accepted a pricey cabinet as a gift and never thought twice. Most of them were ashamed when I brought it up. None wanted to be part of a scandal until they saw the paperwork. Humanity does that. Once you place the data in front of someone, they stop telling themselves polite stories. They see the ledger. One of the key breaks came from the least dramatic place of all, the garage. I'd kept old tax packs and receipts in a toolbox in the shed, something she'd never cared to rummage through because it looked like the junk of a tired old man. There, under a coil of wire, I found an envelope with a stamped name and a note that matched her handwriting. Inside were copies of a transfer schedule. Dates, amounts, references to moving funds, and settle before June. It was handwriting, it was paper, and to a bank auditor that's gold. With copies in hand, I went to a lawyer. I needed someone who wouldn't be rattled by small towns and big lies. David, a no-nonsense man with gray at his temples and a habit of looking at people like they were math problems, listened and then arranged the clean step I needed. Properly documented subpoenas, the right legal channels to freeze accounts, the sort of official paperwork that makes people with false bravado suddenly very aware of the law. The legal world moves slow, but it moves with force when it has facts. We didn't rush it. We built a file, and then we built the second file. Social proof. I wanted the town to see the pattern in the faces tied to it. So I met with the charity treasurer quietly and placed a copy of a courier receipt on her desk. She frowned, checked dates, and put us on to an audit contact. I spoke to the PTA head, who agreed to look into whether certain anonymous donations had strings attached. Each institution we touched began to peel back the veneer. One of the most effective things I did was let the smallest indignities do the work for me. Instead of shouting at Linda in front of people, I let little things happen where she least expected them. A letter from the bank that she'd ignored arrived, and an auditor called to schedule a meeting. Invitations she'd enjoyed dried up as groups reconsidered sponsorships. Folks who had dined on her generosity at fundraisers suddenly found themselves in conversations about provenance and ethics. The more I let the institutions act, the less it looked like I was on a vendetta, and more like the community cleaning house. There was one particularly satisfying move that cost me very little, but punished her dearly. I arranged for a small, local online column, nothing national, but read by most local families, to run a piece on the importance of transparency in community giving. I made sure the journalist had the documents, the dates, and the sources. He wrote the piece with fairness and restraint. The article never accused her by name, but the facts it spotlighted were clear enough for those who knew. She felt the first real chill when people at the hardware store gave her shorter nods. My aim was never to destroy without purpose. I wanted the truth to land where it mattered, in paper and in people's minds. Once the bank places a hold, once the charity freezes an account, once the vendor refuses further arrangements, the scaffolding falls away. Money dries up. Favors dry up. Those who once smiled now look wary. It's a slow, elegant rot. There were nights when guilt crept in. You don't live 40-plus years without a conscience that nudges. I found myself thinking about the little things she had done, the times she'd covered for me when I'd been late, the meals she'd made when I came home exhausted. Those memories are knives in a man's gut. But then I'd remember the ledger, the sleeps she'd planned, the way I'd been cataloged like property, and the guilt would namelessly turn into resolve again. One thing surprised me. Some people were kinder than I expected. A woman from the church, the kind who'd always offered a casserole when someone was sick, slipped me a note in the post. I thought I knew her. Forgive us for failing to look. It was a small thing, but I took it as fuel. The idea that the community could shift from being her audience to becoming our witness was the core of the plan. When the legal freezes started, small at first, then more serious, Linda began to look like someone learning their lines for the first time. The confidence that once made her magnetic curdled into panic. I watched her in the evenings, trying to maintain a neutral face while bills were marked pending, while vendors picked up the phone and explained that payments had been delayed pending review. She made desperate calls to friends. She tried to bribe the handyman she'd given a weekend to with cash. Men who'd once eaten at her table now gave her curt excuses. Watching that change was not pleasureless. It was necessary. It was the moment the ledger met consequence. Then there was the moment when I decided to make the story public, but not cruelly so. I organized a community meeting at the town hall, framed as a talk about transparency and responsibility in civic life. I invited a few people I trusted, the treasurer, the reporter, Michael. I asked my lawyer to be present. I told the room about how easy it is to believe a charming story, how easy it is to accept the spectacle without noticing a pattern of missing receipts. I laid out the facts calmly: transfers, motel logs, vendor statements. Nothing sensational, just the ledger in plain language. I watched faces change from curiosity to grim recognition. Linda sat near the back. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. No voice, no performance. People who had once applauded her smiled awkwardly and looked away. The town didn't stand up and point with pitchforks. It did the quieter, more lethal thing. It stopped giving her favors. After that night, a cascade of things happened in ways I had planned and in ways I hadn't. The charity severed ties until a full audit. A lender in town inspected mortgage documentation and found irregularities. A vendor refused to supply services without cleared funds. There were legal letters, formal demands. The machine of ordinary civility turned, and the parts of her life that had been greased by favors suddenly screeched. I didn't gloat in public. I didn't parade receipts on social media. That would have cheapened the truth. But quietly, I watched as a woman who had spent 2 decades turning my life into her cash flow lost the currency of her reputation. There is a strange justice in watching the scaffolding collapse and in seeing your son regain footing in the rubble. Michael began to understand the practicalities of paying bills, of what a ledger meant. He learned that adults keep receipts for a reason and that honesty has teeth. He started visiting more, not out of duty, but because when truth sits on the table, the choices a man makes toward his child become clear. By the time the auditors presented their first preliminary finding, I'd already anticipated much of it. There was no single knockout blow, no dramatic one-page confession. It was, instead, 1,000 small truths added together until the ledger balanced against her. The town had seen the pattern. The banks had the numbers. The charity had its concerns. Her social capital had bled away in small hemorrhages, and through it all I kept the file on my desk where I could look at it and remind myself that the work of repair is an honest one. Revenge had never been the point. Restitution was to get back what I had lost. To make sure a man who'd given 20 years of his life wasn't written off in a cheap note. When the prosecutor called to say they were opening an inquiry, criminal possibly, I sat down hard. It was not triumph, it was relief. Relief that the system, slow as it is, would do what I could not alone. But even then, I knew the final acts were still ahead. Exposing the ledger had stripped the mask from her face. The legal machinery would chew slowly, but social judgment had acted fast. She was smaller now, not just in funds, but in presence. And that was necessary because what came next would be public and irrevocable. I was ready. I had built a case, found witnesses, organized the town's attention. All I had to do now was watch the last pieces fall into place. The day it all came to a head was colder than I expected. Not the weather outside, though autumn had clawed through the trees by then, but the air in that courthouse lobby. You could feel the tension humming in the walls, as if everyone there knew a reckoning was about to land. I sat on the hard wooden bench, hands folded, papers organized neatly in the folder on my lap. 2 decades of my life compressed into ink and signatures, receipts and affidavits. Every late night I'd spent hunting for clues, every awkward conversation, every humiliating realization. All of it had been distilled into something I could carry in one hand. Across the lobby, she stood by her attorney, lips painted sharp, eyes darting like a cornered fox. She still tried to dress the part, pearls, pressed suit, hair sprayed into place. But the confidence she once wore like armor had cracked. I saw it in the way she chewed the inside of her cheek, the way her hand trembled when she adjusted her necklace. When they called our case, the world slowed. I followed my lawyer into the courtroom, a place that smelled faintly of polish and dust, and took my seat at the petitioner's table. The judge entered, robe heavy, voice even. To anyone else it might have felt ordinary. To me it felt like standing on the edge of the last 20 years. Her attorney spoke first, spinning tales of miscommunication, of shared accounts misunderstood, of a marriage that had simply broken down under the strain of time. It was polite theater, but I watched the judge's expression, flat, unmoved. He'd heard it all before. Then it was our turn. My lawyer laid the evidence out like stones across a river, one after another, making a bridge too solid to ignore. Transfers with her signature, deposits into hidden accounts, receipts for hotels she had no reason to visit, donations made with stolen funds, witness statements from neighbors, colleagues, even our son. Each fact landed like a hammer. I didn't have to speak much. When I did, my voice was steady, stripped of emotion, just the truth. "Your Honor," I said, "I gave her 20 years of my life. She took them, and while I can't have those years back, I can take back what she stole with them." Her mask slipped then. She tried to interrupt, raising her voice, insisting I was lying, that I was bitter, vindictive. The judge silenced her with a gavel. For the first time in decades, she didn't control the room. The power she'd held, with charm, with lies, with manipulation, crumbled under the weight of documented truth. When the verdict came, it was clean. The accounts were seized, the properties restored, restitution ordered. More than that, criminal charges recommended. The courtroom murmured. She slumped in her chair as if someone had cut the strings holding her up. I didn't smile. I didn't pump my fist. I just exhaled, long and heavy, the way a man does after carrying a load too long. Because it wasn't victory. It was survival. Outside, reporters lingered. Not many, but enough. Questions were thrown like stones. Did you know? How long had it been going on? Do you have anything to say to your wife? I kept my answer simple. The truth always comes out. Sometimes it takes 20 years, but it comes. The weeks that followed were strange. My house, the one she'd nearly stolen, was quiet again. My son visited more, eyes clearer now that he knew who his mother really was. The town, once charmed by her, now nodded at me with a different respect. They didn't see a bitter old man anymore. They saw someone who had been wronged, and had stood back up. And Linda? She faded. One day I passed her on the street, hair unkempt, clothes wrinkled, a paper bag of groceries clutched like treasure. She didn't meet my eyes. The woman who once stole 20 years of my life couldn't even manage a glance. I realized then, revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't fire or blood or fists slammed against tables. It was silence. It was the absence of her power. It was me, walking home free, while she carried the weight of everything she'd done. I lost 20 years to her lies, but in the end, I took back my name, my dignity, my son's respect, my peace. And standing there in the cool evening air, watching the sun dip behind the houses I'd built with my own hands, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. I felt whole again.